So in this video, we're going to talk about the most important tool in your kitchen, and it truly is your knife. I know people get scared about having a super sharp knife in the kitchen, but it really can transform your experience of cooking your dinner or your meals. And I want to talk to you a little bit about why that is today. And, you know, people have this idea that expensive chef knives are, well, just that, expensive and necessary for your kitchen, but it's totally not true. But having a super sharp knife is so important that I really wanted to take the time to explain the difference in knives and why you should really consider getting a new knife, or at least getting your knives sharpened. So these are the different knives that I use on a regular basis, and we'll go over them. And yes, this is an expensive chef knife. It's a global brand and it's over $100, but I will tell you that I reach for this knife, which is about $35, just as often as I grab this one. The most important thing to know when you're choosing a knife is to choose a knife that feels super great in your hand. And the handle is made of wood, it's super soft around the corners, and it just feels great in my hand. It's not super heavy, so it doesn't tire my arm out. You know, I've got some super expensive chef knives that are made in Germany, and they're so heavy that my arm literally gets tired if I do a lot of chopping. And so the knives I enjoy the best are a little bit lighter. Both of these are lighter in weight. And so just look for a knife that feels good in your hand. I like 8-inch chef's knives. 8 inches is the length of the blade, not the handle. It feels great for me, but certainly a 6-inch would work, and longer would work, but I wouldn't go, I don't know, I'd stick with 8 if you're learning how to cut for the first time. What makes a chef knife versus maybe a paring knife is the space between the handle and the blade. And as you can see right here, when I'm gripping the knife, there's enough room for my knuckles before the edge of the blade would hit the cutting board. So when I go down, there's enough room for the blade to hit squarely on the board, and I still am able to hold my knuckles underneath it. As opposed to a knife like this, where if I were to go straight down, my knuckles would hit before the blade would ever get a chance to hit down on that cutting board. So that's what makes a chef's knife specifically, is that space between the handle and the bottom of the blade, for room for your hand. Having a sharp knife will greatly reduce the amount of time it takes you to cook in your kitchen, because you'll be able to cut faster and smoother with less effort. And I know people get scared because of the fear of cutting themselves, but truly having a knife that's sharp, you'll actually cut yourself less, especially once you learn in the next video on how to hold your knife and how to do proper knife cuts. But having a sharp knife means that you are not pushing with a lot of effort to cut through your food. And that effort, that motion, is where most people cut themselves. They're pushing so hard into their food that the food rolls on them, and that's when their hands get caught and they get cut. But when it's super sharp, you're not putting very much effort and you're just gliding through, which greatly reduces the chance that you're gonna get cut by your knife. So it's interesting, after all these years of cooking, I rarely cut myself when I'm actually cutting food on my cutting board, because I know how to keep my hands out of the way, my knife is nice and sharp, and it's just a rhythmic motion for me. But the times I do cut myself the most is when I'm washing my knives. So that's a chance that where my knife is laying at a funny angle or something like that. So you want to be careful when you're washing it. And you always want to wash them by hand. You want to wash them in your sink by hand with soapy water, and then dry it by hand as well. And then for storing it, I love these knife guards. And now don't do this, because the chance of you accidentally doing that is high. So the way you do it is you put, this is the bottom end of the blade, you just slide it right there and then glide it gently into the handle like that. And then this can easily go in your drawer. You don't have to have a big fancy knife block on your counter or one of those magnets or anything like that to protect your blade. And then another thing that I really like to do is to put some shelf liner in the drawer where my knives go, so that they're not constantly banging around even if they're covered. So that's the proper way to store a chef's knife. Sharpening. I want to talk to you about sharpening your chef knife. So this is called a honing steel, and people think that this will sharpen your knife, and the absolute truth of it is it doesn't actually sharpen your knife in the idea that it takes any metal off to make the edge of your knife any of a finer edge, hence being sharper. What it does though is every day when you're chopping, your blade, the very, very edge of your blade has what they call micro bends, tiny little bends where the knife, from cutting through something hard like a potato, it just bends the knife out of alignment slightly. And so when the blade is not perfectly in alignment, it just doesn't feel as sharp. So doing this bends the edge of their blade back into alignment, hence making it sharper. And so I get my knives sharpened professionally about every 6 months, and I'm able to go that long between sharpenings because every day when I go to pull my knife out of my drawer, pull my knife out and I immediately pull this out. And then I do this, and it's super simple to do. It seems complex, but it's not. You wanna make sure your fingers are behind these little rivets so that you don't get cut, and then you just hold your blade about 20 degrees up off of the steel. If that's flat, then 20 degrees up, and you just slide it on one side, and you can do the same side about 10 times, and then I just line it up on the other side about 20 degrees off of it, and I just do it on this side. And I swear to you, if you start cutting into, say, something like a tomato that's got thicker skin, and you're having a difficult time, and then you go and do this, and then you go back, you'll definitely notice a difference. So if you continually do this, just a few swipes before you start cooking every time, then your knife will stay nice and sharp for a super long time, and then you won't have to get it sharpened as often. They make a lot of great self-sharpening gadgets out there, and I think some work way better than others. So if you have one that you love, certainly keep using it. But I love to go and just take it into a shop. It's about $5, and they professionally sharpen my knife about every 6 months, and it stays super sharp for me. In the beginning, when you're first learning how to cut with a knife, remember that precision is more important than speed. And so as long as you go slow and are precise, you will learn how to use that sharp blade without cutting yourself, and then as you get more and more comfortable, you can get faster and faster, and we'll talk a lot about that in another video. The other knives that I like to use are a small paring knife, and so for tiny little jobs where you're cutting something really little, it's nice to have a small paring knife. And this isn't one that you would chop straight down with. It's something that you might like cut out a bad spot on something with, and something where you just want a small blade that's just a little extension of your hand. And then a serrated knife is also great for bread or for something that's tougher. Sometimes I use a serrated edge for a tomato or an eggplant. If my knife is not particularly sharp, it always cuts through it really nicely. So those are other really great tools to have. So I'll put a link on where to find a knife like this if you're interested. Again, this is one of my favorite. The brand is Forstner, Victorinox. They merged as a company, so you have to say both names. But like I said, it doesn't have to be expensive, but it's super important that you have a sharp knife in your kitchen.